Hello everybody, this is Connor, BoatsDon'tSink, here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This time we're going to be looking at the Thief Sword deck from BP08. This is another deck that was originally introduced in BP05 as part of the Omens, and has gotten further support here in BP08, both within the Usurpation archetype and outside of it in the form of a couple other cards that turn this into one of the more powerful aggro decks that is available in this format. As always, before we take a look at the deck list, this is meant to be a starting point, something to work off of. There's a couple card choices in here that not everyone may agree with, or there might be some other cards that you want to include instead. So play around with it, find what works best for you, and roll with that. Taking a look at the list here, we do see the pretty much entire Usurpation package from BP05, included almost all at full playsets, along with just some of the other generically good aggro cards that we've gotten across sets. Filled out with, let's see, we have one card, I believe, from set 7 here, and then three new cards from BP08. All of which are actually rather important to our strategy and help give us real win conditions against a wider range of decks. So overall, pretty great here. Just solid aggro deck. Low curve, which we'll take a look at. And a lot of familiar cards. Evo deck's pretty easy. We don't actually play that many followers that evolve. And the ones that we do play, many of them evolve for free. So it actually makes going first very powerful in this deck. In addition to just being an aggro deck, we want to go first to sort of get on board quicker anyway. But we can max out on a lot of our Evo slots here since we don't have that many followers that evolve. And as always, you can check out the deck log page for this deck using the code in the bottom right. It's going to be 58NTU, or you can use the link in the description for that. Taking a look at the breakdown here, we have 28 followers and 12 spells. The spell count might seem a little bit high for an aggro deck, but the spells that we do play, many of them help us either push extra damage or reach certain thresholds that we need for our usurpation effect quicker. Or, in the case of Dance of Usurpation, just act as an alternate win condition for us. The curve is pretty low, 10 1-drops, 15 2-drops, 6 3s, and 9 4s. So with the height of our curve being 4 here, we're going to be playing our powerful turns pretty quick. We're going to be playing multiple cards a turn pretty quick, and with the sort of end of our curve leading to a decent bit of recursion, we are going to be able to try to end the game as quickly as possible as well. Taking a look at the cards in a bit more detail here. First up, we have Ephemera Sword Angel. So this is a 1-cost 2/1 neutral. As Rush and Fanfare, if there are at least 3 cards on an opponent's field, give this follower +1 attack and Assail. This card is not super critical to the deck's design. Big thing here is against decks like the Puppetry Forest and Idolatry Rune. They're going to have a lot of stuff on their board. It's going to be pretty easy to get this extra point of attack and Assail. That might matter less in the Idolatry matchup, since their control deck, they're going to have a removal that's going to be able to take this out pretty quick anyway. But against the Puppetry deck, having a 1-cost 3/1 Rush Assail that can either trade into something or just stick on board as a 3/1 to sort of threaten your opponent a little bit, it'd be pretty good. This doesn't necessarily have to be Ephemera, though. If there's any other 1-drop that you want to play, this is basically just here to be a 4th 1-drop body that we can open to try to get on board quick. The real 1-drop that we want to be opening is Servant of Usurpation from BP05. This is a 1-cost 1/2. Fanfare, each opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery. And during your turn, whenever a card is put from an opponent's deck into the cemetery, give this follower +1 attack. So the Fanfare will trigger its own effect, making it a 1-cost 2/2 on play. That is basically just Goblin stat line, but it does have the potential to scale higher rather quickly. We play a pretty solid handful of cards that mill our opponent off the top of their deck into their cemetery. a lot of which can curve straight out of this. We have another 1-cost spell, and then 3 2-costs, and then a 3 and a 4. Meaning if we stick this on 1, our entire curve pretty much keeps buffing this over and over again, as long as our opponent doesn't remove it. And this can very quickly hit, 5 or 6 attack even, and chunk away at our opponent on its own. Makes it a very powerful card, definitely something your opponent does not want to see hit the board on turn 1. The rest of our 1-costs are spells. We have 2 copies of Avaricia. This is another spell from BP08. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal a Thief card from among them and add it to your hand. Put the remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. If you revealed an Octrus Omen of Usurpation, return this card to your hand. So we have a pretty good variety of Thief cards here. Most of them are from the Usurpation package. And then, of course, also Avaricia itself and the Grand Acquisition spell from BP06, I believe. All targets that we can grab with this. And, of course, if we do grab Octrus, we get to put Avaricia back into our hand, meaning it is true card advantage. And we get to go again and hopefully find another good card afterwards. This isn't necessarily an aggressive card, but because we have so many low-costed followers, it's very possible that we end up with an extra play point left over here and there. For example, on turn 3, you play a 2-drop instead of a 3-drop. It makes sure that you aren't just wasting that 1 play point. You can turn it into, digging for a body that's going to either help you curve out better or just be a very powerful piece like Octrus. Next up, we play 1 copy of Biofabrication. So this is a neutral spell. You can select a face-up evolved follower in your evolved deck, turn it face down, and draw a card. You do have to have a face-up evolved follower as a target to be able to play this card, so drawing it early, you can't just jam it as a 1-cost cantrip to sort of filter your hand, unfortunately. But later in the game, it is actually quite possible for this deck to go through all 3 copies of the Octrus or Ralmia evolves, and since we have ways to recur both of them, it's not impossible that you would want a 4th chance to evolve one of them, or just a 3rd chance at either of the other evolves in the deck, since you do play 3 base copies of the Apostle of Usurpation, and it is possible to recur Liad as well. If you don't think this is going to come up very often, or it's just not something you want to bother with, this can very, very easily just be the 3rd copy of Avaricia. Lastly, 3 copies of Grand Acquisition, the 1-cost quick spell from BP06. Each opponent buries the top 3 cards of their deck. So that is pretty much just going to help us with the game plan that Usurpation has of hitting cemetery thresholds. We play a lot of cards that either care about us directly milling our opponent, like Servant of Usurpation, or have requirements, or they like bonus effects if our opponent has 10 or more cards in cemetery, and this helps us get there quite quickly. It is kind of do nothing on its own, since you're just minusing a card to mill your opponent 3, which doesn't really do anything outside of having synergy with the rest of the deck. But if you think about it this way, if you open Servant of Usurpation on turn 1 and then play this on turn 2, you give +3 attack to your Servant and you get to hit your opponent for 5, which essentially makes this a 1-cost burn 3 spell, which, let me tell you, any deck would take a Lightning Bolt. Any aggro deck would love to have just Lightning Bolt in it to dome our opponent for 3. And of course, setting up our other effects early is great. In some matchups, this does actually double as an alternate win condition. Decks like 2-cost Abyss, which mills itself a fair amount already, we can actually play towards a deck out win condition against them, and milling them a bunch helps with that. Additionally, control decks, such as Idolatry Rune, and some of the Haven decks, they're going to go for longer games anyway, and they're going to be drawing cards on their own anyway, so milling them can also allow you to play for either a deck out win condition or going for the 20+ cemetery effect on Dance of Usurpation, where you can just hit them with giant burn spells and try to win that way. Moving into our 2-cost followers, we have Liad, the Crescent Blade. This card has been a pretty like contentious point in a lot of sword decks, especially during set 7 when it was kind of on the fence as to whether you played this in Natura Sword. He's a 2-cost 1/3, so not a very aggressive stat line, but while he's reserved on your field, so untapped, not engaged, he has Intimidate and Aura, so he cannot be targeted by your opponent's effects, and he also cannot be attacked. Mildly relevant when Victoria has a sale and is in like one of the best decks right now. And then at the start of your end phase, you can select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 1 damage. That 1 damage may not seem like a lot, but in the Puppet matchup, it is great at removing a lot of their tokens, including the Victorias. And against things like Disdain Dragon, where they're shooting their own followers, they're going to have low defense a lot of the times. You can just kind of pick off guys at the end of your turn. Combined with any other like removal or just attacking things, the 1 damage can also just make math on like other parts of removal quite good as well. In addition, the big thing here is not necessarily that he is removal. That's kind of a bonus actually in this deck. Whereas previously a big selling point was, oh, he can kill the assembly droids in Machina Abyss. You're not going to see that as much. Killing the puppets is sweet. But Intimidate and Aura means he's essentially impossible to remove if he's untapped. So he will always get a chance to attack your opponent's life total directly, which is really good in an aggro deck. Having a guy that you can play down, and even though he doesn't have Storm, he is going to basically guaranteed get to attack. And since he's going to guaranteed get to stick around for a little while, he also helps fulfill Rolmia's board conditions for both her evolve cost reduction and her on-evolve effect to buff herself. So that can help you play towards an early game Rolmia as well. Liad can evolve for 2 play points into a 2/4. With on-evolve, select an enemy leader or enemy follower on the field and deal it 2 damage. The rest of his effects are the same, but that 2 extra damage can be good either A, for removal, especially combined with the ping 1 at end phase, or just for 2 extra face damage. There are times where you can just pay 2 to evolve your Liad, burn your opponent 2, and then get in for 2 damage, and this guy was just, 4 extra damage. That's 20% of their total defense, so pretty good for chipping away. The next 2-cost we play is 1 copy of Mio Honda. This is a 2-cost 2/1 Storm. The strike effects do not matter. We're not playing either Uzuki Shimamura or Rin Shibuya in this deck. We are just playing the Mio, which may not seem great, but I believe she is actually the only 2-cost Storm option that this deck has right now. And having to attack, 2-cost, 2 damage to the face, pretty good. Big part here, though, is that we can recur her off of Sword Flash Panther. So, say you play this early game just to chip your opponent for 2. Later in the game, when you play Sword Flash Panther, you can choose to bring her back and give her +1 attack, meaning she'll storm in for 3 again, which can be really good if, you just need a little bit of extra damage, or you're just trying to keep threatening your opponent's defense throughout the game, and can help stick the Sword Flash Panther, since she'll be a pretty high value target to remove as well. Our next 2-drop is the sort of cover card of the deck herself, Octress, the Omen of Usurpation. She's a 2-cost 2/2 with a lot of text. Fanfare, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their deck into their cemetery. So obviously this is going to help set up all of our usurpation effects, similar to how our Grand Acquisition does. Servant's going to get a buff if you play this on turn 2 right after Servant, and it's going to help you get to the 10 in cemetery for all your other cards. Her next effect is activated ability. You can pay 8 to select a card in an opponent's cemetery and play it for 0 play points. Very rarely is there going to be a card that is worth you paying 8 for, especially because decks aren't playing 8 drops really right now. But one funny scenario that could come up, probably not giant in this format, because I don't think Kuan is seeing that much play. But if you do ever get to the point where you can pay 8 against a Dimension Shift deck, you basically win on the spot because you can take infinite turns. Unlike, effects like this in games like Magic the Gathering, you're not going to exile or banish the Dimension Shift after you play it, so you can just untap, pay 8, take an extra turn, untap, pay 8, take an extra turn, so on and so forth. until you just amass enough bodies on board to keep chipping away at your opponent and killing them across your infinite turns. So something to keep in mind, probably not huge this format. Main thing that Octress is here for is the fanfare, and of course the evolve. She normally evolves for 2, but if your opponent has 10 or more cards in their cemetery, she gets to evolve for 0 instead. She evolves into a 4/4, which is enormous. Being able to play a 2-drop and evolve it for 0 into a 4/4 is great stat line, a very good way to sort of keep your opponent on their toes. On evolve, she selects a card in an opponent's cemetery and puts it into your EX area. And in addition to that, if your opponent has at least 10 cards in cemetery, any card you play from the EX area costs 2 less. So not only is she a 2-cost 4/4, she's also giving you cost reduction on whatever you steal here, which is both card advantage and just value. You basically get to tutor whatever you want, assuming your opponent has a good selection of cards in their cemetery. Some decks, unfortunately, are going to be so heavily like archetype based that they're not really going to have great targets for you. Things that, need idolatry followers on field, or idolatry cards on field, or they need puppetry cards on field, aren't going to help you much. But most decks are still going to have something that you can find, whether it's a good removal spell like Whispers of a Dream, or Nature's Guidance, which can let you reuse your effect. Could let you, swing with Octress, bounce her back, and then play her again to just steal something else. Or it could allow you to play a Storm Follower, pick it back up, and play it again, either the same turn or later. Or just to grab a really big power play. Grab something like a Forte and hit your opponent for 5 immediately. So a lot of variety, a lot of options. Really just going to be very situational as to what matchup you're playing and whatnot, as to whether you can steal something good there. The other big thing to keep in mind, I guess, as the idolatry deck has been getting more popular, I won't take any credit for that, but she can steal Lashena, which, really funny, right? You play Octress for 2, evolve it for 0, steal Lashena, she's cost reduced down to 2. So for 4 play points, you get the 4/4 Octress and you get the Lashena. Lashena makes the 2 amulets in your EX area, which also get cost reduced, so you can play both of them for 0. So for 4 play points, you get the entire Lashena setup, and you have a 4/4. Sometimes it can be hard to actually find a moment to do this in the matchup. If your opponent is playing proactively and kind of pushing you and controlling the board, and it may not be super valuable if you are not ahead in damage. But in this matchup, if your early aggression can get you ahead in the life race, getting your own copies of Destruction in White and Destruction in Black into play can essentially just win you the game on the spot. Your opponent is not going to be attacking you. They're going to be focusing on removing your guys that you play every turn. So your life is generally rather safe outside of their own amulets burning you. And if you have the same amulets healing and burning them back, it just turns into a game of you slowly chipping them away and them not really being able to chip you away. And especially if you get them down, the amulets down before your opponent, they're going to have to be struggling to remove both a 2/4 and a 4/4 while trying to get their own setup in play, and can make you really favored in that matchup, even outside of the part where aggro decks are kind of favored into Lashena's early game regardless. Next 2-drop we play, Ralmia Sonic Racer, legendary from BP06. This is a 2-cost 3/2 rush. Costs 1 less to evolve for every other follower on your field, and evolves for 3 play points. I don't have a slide for this here, but this card being in the deck is a reason you could, if you wanted, consider playing some cards that generate token followers. The main one you would want to consider, probably, is Floral Fencer. Of course, the classic, the staple, 3-cost 3/3, evolve for 1. On evolve, it makes a 1/1 and a 2/2. Decks don't particularly have good wide removal options right now outside of Altar Plane Arbiter, or just crashing a bunch of guys, or specifically Sweet Tooth Medusa. So any other matchup like Puppet matchup and stuff, your opponent's going to trade just a ton of bodies into actually answering your 1/1 and 2/2. Otherwise, you get a very easy free Ralmia Evo. and going first, you can play Floral Fencer, evolve it, and if your opponent leaves all 3 bodies, your turn 5 is pay 2 for Ralmia, pay 0 to evolve, and then on evolve, you can pay 3. They give it +1/+1 for every other follower on your field, which would turn it into a 7/6 in that scenario on turn 5, allowing you to get in for, what is that, 11, 12, 13, 14 damage on turn 5. Really good. I don't have Floral Fencer in this list. I think the Space and the Evo deck are a little tight for that. Despite the fact that we're playing like full play sets of some of our evolves, it does actually come up that you're using the 3rd copies of them. So much so that we have the biofabrication in, right? So having to cut down to 2 could be a little awkward. Ralmia at 2 is probably fine. Octrus is something you definitely have to leave at 3. So fitting extra evolves is not the easiest thing. But if you want to explore that option a little more, I'm going to throw it out there. Otherwise, Ralmia is here for us just sticking a lot of bodies, being aggressive. We don't have to evolve her for 0. If we play her for 2 and evolve her for 1, she's a 3-cost 4/3 Storm. If we evolve her for 2, she's still 4 play points for 4 Storm damage, which is plenty fine. And in the late game, we can still hopefully get to pay the 3 to buff her a little bit, and maybe she's 6 or 7 Storm damage. And that's just fantastic. That's Forte. That's how we end games. Other big thing, right, is Sword Flash Panther is a 4-drop that we play that on play can reanimate a cost 2 or lower. We previously mentioned using this to reanimate Mio. However, if you can evolve, you can reanimate Ralmia and then evolve into a 4/3 Storm. And of course, Sword Flash Panther himself is going to buff her by 1 attack, so she's actually a 5/3. And will count toward both the cost reduction on the evolve ability and will count toward the on evolve buff ability if you're that late in the game. Next 2-drop we have is Zealot of Usurpation. This is a 2-cost 3/2 rush. Similar fanfare. Each opponent buries the top card of their deck. Then, if there are at least 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, put the top card of your deck into your EX area. First up, this is a 2-drop that mills the opponent. So this is a great card to curve out of Servant of Usurpation. That gives you just 6 attack on board turn 2. You get to hit them for 3 immediately. And they have things they have to answer very fast. And it's probably actually not very likely they can answer either of them. Definitely not both of them. So lets you get a pretty good lead there. The other thing is if you're playing this in the mid game or later, they have 10 cards in Cemetery. You get to put the top card of your deck into your EX area. It's essentially drawing a card, so it's card advantage. But it's even better than card advantage because Octrus's Evolve can cost reduce whatever we put in our EX area. So this could potentially, in the late game, give us a 0-cost Ralmia, or a 0-cost Usurping Spineblade, or a 2-cost Sword Flash Panther, or something like that that's just very efficient, very powerful. The last 2-cost card we have here is a spell, Usurping Spineblade. It's a quick spell. Select an enemy follower on the field, deal it 3 damage, and each opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery. Then, if there are at least 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, deal 2 more damage to the selected follower. So it's 2-cost 3 damage, which is a great baseline, and then is 2-cost 5 damage if your opponent has 10 or more, and it mills, so it can help fuel all of our stuff. Big thing here is that both Lloyd and Anastasia, after a combo turn, are 3/5s, which means you can remove both of them, either of them rather, with Usurping Spineblade. Especially good if you know your opponent's about to go into the Anastasia combo turn. You can leave 2 play points up, which is not very aggressive, but if they have the 10 in Cemetery, you can leave 2 play points up. Maybe your turn was playing an Octrus to mill them to 10, evolving, stealing something, playing it, and then passing with 2 play points up, and then you get to Usurping Spineblade them to just kill something on their end step. Make it a little easier to clear their board afterwards, because you're probably going to need to clear some of their board. It is also noteworthy, this can clear an unevolved Altar Plane Arbiter. You might be thinking, why are they playing it unevolved? You're an aggro deck. Sometimes they might just have to play this on 5 in order to clear whatever bodies are on your board so they don't die. This lets you sort of punish them immediately by not letting them keep it to evolve. You get to just pop it, send it away. They have to have like a Hell's Unleasher or something to get it back. So really good removal there. It's really good for keeping your opponent's important cards off the board, and it's cheap enough that you can sort of weave it in between semi-aggressive plays on your own. Moving into 3 drops, we have Disciple of Usurpation. 3 cost 3/2 Storm, so good just aggressive card. And of course, good to curve out of your 1 and 2 drops, right? Strike. Each opponent puts the top card of their deck into their cemetery, so still continues to pump Servant of Usurpation. And then if there are at least 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, give this follower +2 attack. This makes this card quite insane. Obviously, it's a 3 cost, 3 damage Storm if you just play it on turn 3, which is already, like, Novice Trooper saw plenty of play. This card is just Novice Trooper with 1 less defense. And it fuels, you know, your servants and all your 10 cemetery effects. But if you play this in the mid game or the late game, this is a 5 damage Storm for 3 play points, which, I mean, 5 damage can end games. Or it can at least chunk your opponent enough that they are in like very dangerous places way earlier than they want to be. If you curve Servant into Zealot into Disciple, and your opponent is not able to answer them, you'll have dealt 13 damage at the end of your turn 3. 13 damage, and that's without the +2 attack bonus on Disciple. So like, you know, your opponent's at 7, you're probably still at 20. And it's turn 3. And if they do kill anything, now your Sword Flash Panther gets to start bringing it back, which just makes it even harder for them to keep up. So this card's really crazy. It can just single-handedly kill your opponent sometimes if they're not like holding removal up. Next, we'll play 3 copies of Gemstaff Commander. This is not the most aggressive or fastest card in the world, but it is a 3/2 for 3 that searches our deck for a Swordcraft follower, which is all of our followers except for Ephemera, but you're not searching Ephemera anyway, so who cares? Big thing here is you'll search an Octress if you need it, or a Rolmia if you need it, or a Sword Flash Panther is a pretty good one to search. You know, Apostle if you need removal, like whatever. It can search anything. So like you're just searching something to help sort of keep going, and it puts a 3/2 on your board that did not cost you hand. Unfortunately, we can't afford to play Ether of the Warrior Wing in this deck, because all of our Usurpation cards are not officers or commanders. They're just Omen and Thief. So Ether, unfortunately, she has a 2/3, so like not great anyway, but getting the Instep buff is pretty cool. Can't do that, unfortunately. We're stuck with Gemstaff Commander. But Gemstaff is still fine here. Moving into our 4 drops, the top of our curve, we have Apostle of Usurpation, 4 cost 3/4. Fanfare, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their deck into their cemetery, so even more mill. Then, if there are at least 10 cards in opponent's cemeteries, draw a card. This is so important. It may not seem like it, especially since he's only 3 attack for 4 play points, but replacing himself is just fantastic. Especially since you're getting mill 2 here, he is very quickly accelerating you to all of your conditions and oftentimes sort of finishing them up, especially if you've played like a Grand Acquisition. And then he's replacing himself while he does it. He evolves for 1 into a 4/5. On evolve, select an enemy follower on the field and deal it 4 damage. So good removal to just sort of keep the pressure on your opponent, sort of stay ahead on board presence. He can shoot something for 4 and then also, of course, rush at something for 4. And he's very difficult to remove. Being 4 cost with 5 defense dodges so much. Obviously, Whispers can't kill him because he doesn't cost 3 or lower, and then Surefire Bullet can't kill him because he has 5 defense. So a lot of the cheap removal is just not going to be able to hit this guy efficiently. They're going to have to spend at least 3 play points to take him out, which is very beneficial for you since you're trying to, you know, make your opponent answer your guys as least efficiently as possible while you are hitting them for damage. Our last follower in the deck, the other 4 drop, is Sword Flash Panther. This is a 4 cost 4/3 with Rush. So decent stat line already, especially for a rusher. With Fanfare, select a Swordcraft follower that costs 2 or less in your cemetery, summon it, and give it +1 attack. That +1 attack is ridiculous, unnecessary. We have a pretty good suite of 2 costs that we can grab here. Obviously, Liad, Mio for just an immediate storm body, Octress to mill our opponent more, evolve again, get more free cards from our opponent, which is very good. She's a 5/4. And since she can evolve for 0, you can just like always play Sword Flash Panther, get her and evolve immediately, regardless of what else you're doing on the turn. Ralmia, of course, turn her into a 5/3 or bigger storm. And then Zealot of Usurpation can be a decent target too, if you just sort of want to draw an extra card, mill your opponent, and you still get a 4/3 or a 4/2 rusher, which if your opponent has an engaged follower can be good removal that just draws you a card. Lastly, we have Dance of Usurpation. This is the new spell that we got in BP08, and very powerful card. Normally you look like a 4-cost spell, and you're like, man, I would not want that in an aggro deck, especially because it's a removal spell. But this card will do it. So for 4 play points, you select any number of enemy followers on the field and deal 4 damage divided between them. Not great, but we have more text. If there are at least 10 cards in opponents' cemeteries, deal 8 damage divided between them instead. So by the time you get to 10 in cemetery, the mid game, probably close to the time you can even play this for 4 to begin with, 8 damage can clear most boards. Obviously, big on us to see a combo turn puppetry boards. You're not going to be able to clear just with 8 damage, but you can still chunk a pretty good amount of them. And if you're able to, like, Usurping Spineblade something on the end step, this might be able to take out the rest. Or it's at least going to take out, like, 3 bodies, which is still better than anything else you can do, really. But the big kicker here, if there are at least 20 cards in opponents' cemeteries, deal 8 damage to each enemy leader. So the big thing here is the control matchups, where it is going to be just objectively harder to stick your bodies and get to attack with them, since your opponent's playing primarily removal. Things like Vengeful Radiance, like Fire Chain, whatever, just stops your bodies from getting through. This is 8 damage straight to face. It is very possible that your win condition in some of these matchups becomes get your opponent to 20 cemetery, turn 8, play 2 of these, 16 them for game. I almost had to stare that down in top 4 in Tampa. My opponent had the 2 dances, and I was getting pretty close to 20. They were just trying to get me low enough that it would actually kill, was the issue. But against a lot of decks, like, they're not going to be healing enough that they can get out of 16 range, especially since your early aggression can sort of set them on a back foot to begin with. So this card can just be a great alternate win condition, as well as full board wipes in a lot of scenarios. Taking a look at the deck as a whole again, the big pros of this deck, it's an incredibly aggressive curve that many current decks can't answer. There's not a lot of widespread wide removal until you get sort of later in the curve, things like Altar Plane Arbiter. Otherwise, decks are just playing like 1-for-1s at best, which you will pretty much always outpace them on. You have good recursion of fast and powerful bodies. Sword Flash Panther is sort of a godsend for this deck, being able to get back your Octresses and Ralmias, among other things. And you have good storm and effect damage to close out games between Disciple of Usurpation, Ralmia, Mio, Sword Flash Panther sort of toolboxing you into any of those, or Dance of Usurpation for matchups where bodies can't get through as easily. You have lots of just good options on how to end the game. The cons, however, your low-cost bodies are weak to wide removal when it does show up. So decks playing things like Fire Chain might be able to 2-for-1 you, or cards like Sweet Tooth Medusa, Crimson Meteor Storm, obviously, Alchemical Lore, lots of rune cards specifically. Altar Plane Arbiter. Against Dragon, you have to be wary of Total Domination, I believe, is the 2-cost deal 2 to everything spell. So things like that are still problems for you. You have to be careful of them. Many of your cards are just sort of subpar. They're under spec before reaching cemetery thresholds. So, you know, a 2-cost 3/2 rush that just mills your opponent 1 doesn't do much if you're not gaining anything from that mill. Apostle of Usurpation being a 4-cost 3/4 that just mills 2. You really want to hit those 10 cemetery thresholds fast to start getting actual value out of your cards. And if you don't draw a curve that can get you there, some of your cards might feel kind of dead in hand. And the last downside here is that you have no way to fully refill on hand. We try to play as many cards as possible that cantrip, So things like Gem Staff, Apostle, Zealot, that are at least giving us a card back when we play them, so we're staying hand neutral. But we're not playing anything like, say, Courtly Dance, where we're just getting like, 3 or 4 cards for the cost of 1 that help us stay very healthy on hand. So here is the full deck once again. Pretty solid aggro deck. I think this deck is very good in the current meta, just because a lot of the big decks right now, Puppetry, 2 cost, etc., are kind of setup decks. They're not doing much in the early game, and it gives you a chance to just sort of take the reins, take control of the pace of the game, and put your opponent on the back foot and kill them. Of course, the Evo deck, and of course, you can check out the deck log page, as I said, using the code 58NTU, or the link in the description. As always, thank you for watching. This is a sweet deck. I think it's very worth playing. I have a couple more decks that I want to talk about in the Set 8 format for the last few upcoming regionals that we have. I know this weekend will be the Caguas, Puerto Rico regional, and then we still have Pasadena as well near the end of the month, and probably a couple more in Europe and AO that I haven't kept up with. So a few more big events, last couple chances for people to qualify for Worlds. I think this is a great deck to play at any of these events. So yeah, thank you for watching. We'll have some more decks out soon. In the meantime, there should be some videos on the screen that you can check out now. So until then, have a good one. We'll see you next time.